Ladies and gents, boys and girls, now I'm in the kit shed preparing a bit of gear, and I want to talk to you about something that quite a few of you have commented on, and it's my tower of feeders, these tower of boxes here. Now, I'm going to talk to you about why I use this system and what's in there, and some of you might think, Rob, that's a bit over the top, it's a bit of an overkill. You know, I use the same feeder week in, week out, never had an issue, and I'm guessing there'll be the odd negative comment in the comment section saying, you know, what a waste of time. But for me personally, this system works because quite often I'm travelling across Europe, I'm travelling to Ireland, I'm fishing international matches, obviously for England, and trust me, you do not want to be the guy who's not got the feeder. Obviously, when we're travelling away, there's not a tackle shop just down the road round the corner. You can't just nip in, grab some feeders. You can't order anything online and they come the next day. That just doesn't happen. So if one of your teammates is catching on a certain feeder or a certain bit of kit, you need to make sure you've got that bit of kit. Now, this tower of feeders doesn't come with me to the bank. Don't worry, I'm not carrying this I've not got a separate wheelbarrow to carry this to the bank. I might take 2 of these boxes, leave it in the van for a normal session in the UK. But obviously, when we go abroad, I'll take the whole tower and leave it in the van. What I like to do then is section things off. So, say I'm going to a Staunton Harold, for instance, in this country. I'll just put a range of feeders in one of these EVA cases, and that is what I'll take to the bank because I know the venue. And quite often on world champs, we'll practice all week, and by the match day, we'll just have a little bag of feeders like that because we've narrowed everything down. So, let's look at the tower. The reason I like this setup is because everything clips together, and obviously, you know, when you're chucking it in the van, that helps. Also, the boxes are really, really sturdy. Now, I think I got these boxes from Screwfix direct. They're not the cheapest boxes in the world, but they're robust. The clips have never let me down. You know, I think they're really good. So, we'll come, hopefully you can see, I'll walk over to you now. Right, first tower, window feeders. So hopefully you can see there, we've got a range of window feeders. We've got Dennett's window feeders here, which are a solid window feeder. And then we've got the Preston caged windows, which I've become really fond of. There. Right, when to use a solid window feeder over a caged one. Now, solid window feeders for me are when you've got quite a lot of fish in your peg, they're sitting high up in the water, and you want to drag them down. So the reason I like a window feeder is because hardly any of the bait comes out that window feeder. So when that feeder goes in, and a fish follows that feeder down, maybe 2 or 3 fish follow that feeder down, there's hardly any choice for the fish apart from your hook bait because nothing's come off that feeder. They know there's bait in the water because obviously they can smell it, they can sense it, but when they get down there, basically it's your hook bait and that's all there is. And that's what they'll pick up. So it's for getting bites when fish are high up in the water or you feel like you don't want to introduce any more particles into the peg. On the counter to that, the other good way of using a window feeder is by filling it with particles and just smearing a tiny bit of ground bait over the window. To be fair, that's not a way that I like to fish with window feeders, but you know, on some venues where they like loads of bait, you know, that's a brilliant way of fishing. Also, you've got to remember, because of the shape of the window feeder, they cast so well, they cast ridiculously well. So if you're struggling for distance, crosswinds, wind in your face, you want to punch it out a long way, window feeder's the way to go. Right, next layer. These are sort of standard cage feeders. These are the cage feeders that I like to use. These are Nisa cage feeders. That one's not got a lead on. Nisa cage feeders, that's a side-loaded one. Very rare, to be honest, that I use side-loaded feeders anymore, apart from on the river. But some side-loaded ones there. These are the ones that I like to use a lot of. These Nisa rockets. Plastic feeders. Again, thinking about international style fishing. Plastic, it seems to work a little bit better when you're using sort of like jokers, loose feeding the ground bait. A wire cage seems to grab the joker a little bit and it pulls most of the joker back when you're fishing. So we've got all different sizes in there. Got a selection of solid plastic tubes as well. Again, just Nisa feeders because obviously all the weights interchange. Very rare that I'll use a solid plastic tube feeder. Most of my work is done with cages. I've got some little tiny cages in there as well. You'd be surprised how many fish you catch on a little tiny feeder. And then a few gurus that just wouldn't fit in another box. We've also got obviously some big boys for feeding some bait. These are fantastic for feeding sort of like long range feeder lines when you want to put a bit of bait out there. Zoom out there, beautiful feeders. Again, remember, I'm not taking all of this to the bank, I'm just taking a small selection to the bank, but it's obviously, it's well worth having. Now this one is my wire cages. Like I say, very rare that I'll use these wire cages, but on the day they're invaluable. Obviously in shallow water, the bait releases from the wire just that little bit quicker, creates a bit of a cloud, makes a difference. Trust me, when we're practicing for England and there's probably, you know, 6 guys, 7 guys on the bank who are fantastic anglers and all know what they're talking about, you know, some of the best anglers in the world, little tiny changes make a massive difference. So having this range of feeders is really important. Then we've got in here some big bait ups. That's the biggest feeder you're allowed in World Champs rules. Obviously there's a feeder limit so people don't chuck out massive feeders, but that's the biggest one you're allowed. So if we want to put out leam or a load of particles, we'll use a carp rod and one of those feeders, big strong braid and one of those feeders. Next case, these are just a selection of river feeders. So these are slightly heavier than the other feeders. We've got heavier feeders, 60 gram. You can see there you go, there's a nice little 60 grammer. Faded a little bit, you might be able to just see it if the camera zooms in on that. But that's 60 gram. It's actually started life as a 44 grammer. But I've put some extra lead underneath the original lead on the feeder, and that's a 60 grammer. So there's quite a few little feeders in here. These are for like river fishing, River Trent, Avon, I fish a lot on there. We've got a big selection of black caps and maggot feeders in there as well. So if we need feeder with extra weight, we've got one there. Here's the gurus. Now, when we went to South Africa, I got loads of these guru feeders because we were fishing with bigger baits, feeding baits like corn, well, only corn. That was about the only bait that we had in South Africa. We were feeding corn. We needed the bait to release from the feeder. And obviously those little nieces that I love using, the trouble with those feeders is they've obviously got a bottom weight and the bait doesn't want to come out of the feeder as easy. So, obviously, the open weight at the bottom means the bait can come out of the feeder easier and you can feed your peg. Obviously a selection of leads, all the leads are interchangeable. It's not often I use these gurus, to be fair, in this country, but when we were in South Africa they were a brilliant feeder to use. Now here's my sort of mega distance selection. We've got in here matrix bullets, 50, 60 grams. We've got some special sort of like handmade jobbies. Guy in the northwest makes those, beautiful feeders if you want to launch a feeder to the moon. To be honest, a Browning, that's the feeder that I'll use 90% of the time. If I want to just literally launch a feeder out, I'm not too bothered about what happens with the feeder, I just want to get it out there. Those Brownings, they chuck like absolute bullets. You can chuck to the horizon with one of those. But that is my distance feeder box. The important thing with obviously your distance feeders, make sure they're heavy enough. There's no point chucking a feeder out if it's too light and you can't reach the distance, so you've got to boss the situation. The final box is just a bit of a, I don't know, a bit of an oddment section. We've got a massive bait up in there. He's a huge bait up, same size feeder, obviously maximum you're allowed, but lead's a bit heavier, lead's bottom weighted, 80 gram, plus the load of that feeder. Obviously you need a carp rod and some decent muscles to chuck that, so get down the gym. We've got some lighter maggot feeders in there for sort of still water work, some little Drennan bullets, some smaller black caps, they're only 10 gram weight, make a tiny little plop when they go in. Some carp feeders there. Getting some Nisas if we want to chuck a long way with a maggot feeder. We've got some matrix domes. They were the feeder we used in Portugal, but to be fair, not using them a lot at the minute, not using them a lot in this country. And then just as a bit of an oddment, so we've got some floating feeders as well, but they're not allowed in World Champs, so it's just if we use them in this country, but I don't think they've ever come out of the box, but it's nice to have them. So you can see there's a bit of everything in the box, in those boxes. Like I say, bit of an overkill for most people, I'd say 99% of people, but while we're in the mood of organising our gear for when we can actually get out on the bank, thought it was wise for me to go through them, have a look through, make sure I've got everything, and while I was doing it, show you guys, and hopefully it gets you in the mood, maybe to just, I don't know, organise your Tupperware boxes a little bit better, or just organise your feeders a little bit better, just a bit of your fishing fix, get you thinking about fishing again. So, until next time, tight lines.